For 30 years, she cared for her rich mother-in-law who despised her. On her 90th birthday, an old video revealed the shocking truth. Eloise Turner stood in the elegant kitchen of her mother-in-law's Charleston mansion, the scent of freshly brewed coffee mingling with the rich aroma of pancakes sizzling on the griddle. The kitchen, adorned with polished marble countertops and gleaming silverware, felt like a stage, and she was a reluctant performer. Clad in a flowery apron, she moved with practiced efficiency, yet her heart was heavy. Are those pancakes supposed to look like that? Margaret Albright's voice cut through the morning air, dripping with condescension. Eloise's fingers tightened around the spatula as she turned to face the formidable matriarch, whose sharp eyes scrutinized her every move. Margaret, now in her 90s but still possessing a striking presence, sat at the breakfast table, her silver hair perfectly styled, a stark contrast to the chaos of emotions churning within Eloise. "Just the way you like them, Margaret," Eloise replied, forcing a smile that felt more like a mask than a reflection of her feelings. "Golden brown and fluffy." Margaret snorted, her lips curling into a disdainful smile. "If only you had the same passion for cooking as you do for cleaning. I might actually enjoy these meals." Eloise swallowed her irritation and turned back to the griddle. The truth was, Margaret had never accepted her. It had been 30 long years of feeling like a stranger in her own home, a servant in the eyes of the woman who held the family's wealth and influence. "Can I get you anything else?" Eloise asked, an edge of weariness creeping into her voice. "No, just hurry. David should be here any minute, and I want everything perfect for my birthday," Margaret snapped, her tone leaving no room for argument. Just then, David, her husband and Margaret's only son, walked into the kitchen, his demeanor instantly shifting as he sensed the tension in the air. "Morning, Mom." "Eloise, what can I do to help?" he asked, his voice bright but with a hint of concern as he glanced between the two women. "Just keep your mother from complaining if you can," Eloise muttered under her breath, but David caught her eye and raised an eyebrow, silently asking if she was okay. "Mom, let's take it easy today," he suggested, trying to ease the atmosphere. "We're celebrating you, after all." Margaret waved her hand dismissively. "If you want to celebrate, you should start by appreciating the effort Eloise puts into this household. It's not easy keeping things running smoothly." Eloise felt her heart sink a little further. The words were laced with sarcasm, but there was a kernel of truth. She had dedicated her life to this family, sacrificing her dreams and ambitions for the sake of Margaret's whims. "I just want the day to be special for you," she said quietly, avoiding Margaret's piercing gaze. As David busied himself with setting up the table, Clara, Eloise's closest friend, arrived. She breezed into the kitchen like a fresh breeze, her bright smile a stark contrast to the heavy atmosphere. "Eloise, I brought those flowers you wanted for the centerpieces," Clara announced, placing a vibrant bouquet on the counter. "Thank you, Clara," Eloise replied, grateful for the distraction. "You always know how to brighten the day." Clara turned to Margaret with a playful grin. "And how's the birthday queen this morning?" Margaret's expression softened slightly, but only for a moment. "I'd be better if I didn't have to rely on the incompetence of others," she retorted, her gaze reverting to Eloise. Eloise exhaled slowly, feeling the familiar sting of Margaret's words. "I'm doing my best, Margaret. I really am," she said, her voice trembling slightly. Clara caught the tension and stepped closer to Eloise, whispering, "You need to stand your ground, Eloise. You've put up with this for far too long." Eloise nodded, but the weight of Margaret's disdain was a heavy cloak she felt unable to shed. "I know, but it's complicated. David is stuck in the middle, and I don't want to make things worse. Sometimes being honest is the best way to resolve things. You deserve respect, Eloise," Clara encouraged gently, placing a reassuring hand on her shoulder. The conversation made Eloise's heart race. She had long ago buried her own desires and aspirations. Did she really deserve respect? The thought felt foreign, as if it belonged to someone else entirely. Maybe I should just keep my head down and get through today, she murmured, a hint of defeat lacing her tone. Clara's brow furrowed with concern. This isn't just about today. It's about your life. You can't keep living like this forever. Eloise opened her mouth to respond, but before she could articulate her thoughts, Margaret's sharp voice rang out again, interrupting them. Can we please focus on the preparations? I want everything to be perfect, and I can't have you two chatting away while there's work to do. Eloise's heart sank once more, but Clara shot her a look that said, We'll talk later. As Clara moved to help David, Eloise turned back to the counter, feeling a mix of anger and sadness bubbling within her. As the minutes ticked by, Eloise found herself lost in thought, searching for a way to reclaim her voice. After all these years, had she truly lost herself? Amidst the chaos, Eloise's eyes caught an old, dusty book on a shelf in the corner of the kitchen. It was Margaret's journal, a relic she had seen but never dared to touch. Curiosity piqued. She found herself drawn to it. I'll be right back, she said abruptly to Clara, who nodded, her expression encouraging. Eloise made her way to the library, her heart racing as she reached for the journal. The leather cover was cracked, and the pages felt fragile beneath her fingers. She opened it carefully, and her eyes scanned the elegant cursive writing within. As she flipped through the pages, she discovered entries filled with dreams, aspirations, and reflections from a time long before she entered Margaret's life. The words painted a picture of a vibrant young woman who had ambitions of travel, love, and adventure dreams that seemed long forgotten. Margaret had dreams? Eloise whispered to herself, astonished. She found herself engrossed in the journal, flipping through pages filled with hopes of a life unfulfilled. The stark contrast between the woman in the journal and the one she cared for was striking. What happened to you? Eloise murmured, her heart aching for the young woman who had once dared to dream. Just then, David entered the library, a frown etched on his face. Eloise, are you okay? Eloise jumped slightly, startled. I found this. She held up the journal as if it were a treasure. It's Margaret's. David stepped closer, intrigued. I didn't know she kept a journal. What does it say? Eloise hesitated, her mind racing with thoughts. It's filled with her dreams. She wanted so much more than this life. David's brow furrowed in confusion. More than this? But she is everything now. I don't think she feels that way, Eloise replied, her voice softening. She might have everything, but it seems she lost herself along the way. David looked thoughtful, biting his lip. That explains a lot, actually. I've always felt there was something beneath the surface with her. Eloise closed the journal gently, her heart heavy with the weight of understanding. Maybe we need to show her that it's never too late to reclaim those dreams. David nodded, his eyes locked on the journal. You're right. Maybe this could change things. But before they could delve deeper into the implications of the journal, the sound of laughter and chatter from the living room pulled them back to reality. The party was about to begin, and Margaret's expectations loomed large. Eloise took a deep breath, her resolve hardening. Perhaps today was the day she would finally make her voice heard. She glanced at David, who offered her a reassuring smile, as if to say they were in this together. The tension between the past and present hung thick in the air, but for the first time in years, Eloise felt a flicker of hope. Today might just be the day everything changed. Eloise turned her move through the elegant library, a room filled with the scent of polished wood and the faintest hint of aged paper. Sunlight streamed through the tall windows, casting a warm glow on the spines of countless books lining the shelves. She had spent years in this house, yet the space still felt foreign, a constant reminder of her place as the caretaker and not a part of the family. As she dusted the shelves, her thoughts were interrupted by the sound of Margaret Albright's sharp voice echoing from the kitchen, where the rich aroma of breakfast wafted through the air. Eloise, are you planning to clean that dust off the shelves or just rearranging it? Margaret called out, her tone dripping with disdain. Yes, Mrs. Albright. Eloise replied, forcing a smile as she tucked a loose strand of hair behind her ear. "I'll be right there." The tension between them had always been thick, a palpable force that weighed heavily on Eloise's shoulders. Margaret's wealth had afforded her many luxuries, but kindness and warmth had never been among them. Every day felt like a battle for respect, a struggle to be seen as more than just a hired hand. As she hurried to the kitchen, she spotted David, her husband's son, entering with a look of concern etched on his face. "Hey, Mom," he greeted, attempting to lighten the mood. "Need any help with the breakfast preparations?" "Help? Just don't burn the toast like you did last time," Margaret snapped, her eyes focused on the frying pan as she expertly flipped an omelet. Eloise exchanged a glance with David, who sighed and shrugged his shoulders before moving to fetch plates from the cupboard. "Maybe you could let Eloise handle the breakfast for a change," David suggested, a hint of frustration creeping into his voice. "She's been working hard all morning. Eloise is here to assist, not to take over my kitchen," Margaret retorted, her tone leaving no room for argument. Eloise felt her stomach churn at the familiar sting of Margaret's words. She knew better than to challenge the matriarch in her own domain. Later, as the morning wore on, Eloise found herself in the library once more, seeking solace among the books. She had been dusting the shelves when something caught her eye, a leather-bound diary tucked away in a corner, half hidden behind stacks of novels. Curious, she reached for it, her fingers brushing against the textured cover. The title had long faded, but she could still make out a faint inscription: Margaret's Reflections. Eloise glanced around, ensuring she was alone, and with a sense of trepidation, she opened the diary. The pages were filled with flowing script, each word a glimpse into a life she had only known through Margaret's sharp remarks and disapproving glances. As she read, her heart began to race. The entries spoke of dreams, aspirations, and a vibrant young woman who had once been full of life. In one of the entries, Margaret wrote about her love for painting. "I want to capture the world in colors," she had penned, her excitement palpable. "I long to travel to Paris and immerse myself in art, to feel alive with every brushstroke." Eloise couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. Where had that ambitious young woman gone? Over the years, Margaret's dreams had seemingly faded into the shadows of bitterness and regret. Eloise turned the pages slowly, her curiosity piqued as she stumbled upon a particularly poignant entry. "Today I met someone special. He has the most beautiful smile and a passion for life that inspires me. I feel alive when I'm with him. But what will my family think?" The words hung in the air, heavy with unspoken truths. Eloise's heart ached for the young woman who had felt so trapped by the expectations of her family. "Eloise!" David's voice broke through her thoughts, causing her to snap the diary shut. She quickly placed it back on the shelf, her heart racing. "What are you doing in here?" he asked, stepping into the library with a curious expression. "I was just tidying up," she said, avoiding his gaze. She could feel the weight of the diary's secrets pressing down on her, but she knew she couldn't share her discovery just yet. David raised an eyebrow, sensing her unease. "You seem distracted. Is everything okay?" Eloise hesitated, her mind racing with thoughts of the diary. "It's nothing, really. Just trying to make sure everything is ready for the party." David nodded, but she could tell he wasn't convinced. "If you need to talk, you know I'm here for you," he offered gently. "Thank you, David," she replied, grateful for his support. "I appreciate it." As he turned to leave, she felt a sudden urge to confide in him, to share what she had found. But the words caught in her throat, tangled in a web of uncertainty. Later that day, as they continued preparing for the party, Eloise's mind kept drifting back to the diary. She felt a growing sense of urgency to share her discovery with David. Maybe, just maybe, understanding Margaret's past could help them navigate the present. Once the kitchen was bustling with activity, Eloise found a moment to pull David aside. "Can we talk for a second?" she asked, glancing around to ensure they wouldn't be overheard. "Sure, what's up?" he replied, his expression shifting to one of concern. Eloise took a deep breath, her heart pounding. "I found something in the library earlier, a diary belonging to your mother. It's filled with her thoughts and dreams from when she was younger." David's eyes widened in surprise. "A diary? I didn't even know she kept one. What did it say?" Eloise hesitated, unsure of how to convey the depth of what she had read. "It's revealing." She wrote about her aspirations, her love for painting, and even about someone special she met. It's like she was a completely different person back then. David frowned, clearly intrigued. "What do you mean? What did she say about this person?" She expressed excitement about him, like he made her feel alive. Eloise explained, her voice barely above a whisper. "But it seems like she was also constrained by her family's expectations. I think there might be more to her story than we realize." David ran a hand through his hair, deep in thought. "That makes sense. Mom has always been so rigid, so focused on control. It's hard to picture her as anything else." He paused, his eyes narrowing. "Do you think she would allow us to read it? It might help us understand her better." Eloise bit her lip, feeling a mix of excitement and apprehension. "I'm not sure. She's always been so private about her life. But maybe if we approach her gently, it could open up a conversation." "Yeah, but knowing her, she might just dismiss it," David replied, frustration creeping into his voice. "She's never been one to talk about feelings or emotions." Eloise nodded, her heart heavy with the weight of uncertainty. "I just feel like there's so much we don't know about her. If we could understand her past, perhaps we could bridge the gap between us." David sighed, rubbing his temples. "I'll think about it. For now, let's focus on the party." As the day progressed and the guests began to arrive, Eloise's mind remained preoccupied with the diary and the glimpses it offered into Margaret's past. The atmosphere was electric, filled with laughter and the sounds of clinking glasses. Yet Eloise felt a disconnection that seemed to stretch across the room. She moved about, serving hors d'oeuvres and refilling drinks, feeling like a ghost in a vibrant gathering. Every now and then, she caught sight of David, who was doing his best to keep his mother entertained, while also attempting to manage the flurry of family members. Margaret, in her elegant attire, stood at the center of it all, a queen on her throne, relishing the attention of her guests. Eloise felt a pang of sadness as she observed the scene. She longed to be included, to feel valued and appreciated, rather than just the invisible caretaker. The weight of Margaret's disdain hung over her like a dark cloud, threatening to overshadow the celebration. As the evening drew on, Eloise felt an urge to share her discovery with David once more, to reignite the conversation about the diary. She hoped that it could be a bridge, a way to connect with Margaret, and perhaps even reveal the softer side of the woman she had grown to resent over the years. But as she moved through the throng of guests, the moment slipped away, lost to the noise and festivities. Instead, she found herself standing near the edge of the room, watching as Margaret basked in the adoration of her family and friends. Eloise sighed, her heart heavy with the weight of unspoken words and unshared revelations. The diary remained a secret, a silent witness to the complexities of Margaret's life, and she hoped that one day it could serve as a catalyst for understanding rather than division. The atmosphere in the grand dining room was thick with anticipation as the guests began to arrive for Margaret's 90th birthday celebration. Eloise stood in the corner, her hands busy arranging a bouquet of fresh flowers, but her mind was elsewhere. She could hear the murmur of voices and laughter, but it felt like an echo in her own world, one where she was often overlooked. Despite the beauty of the occasion, she felt a familiar knot of tension in her stomach, a reminder of the years spent in service to a woman who had never fully accepted her. As the door swung open, David, Margaret's son, entered, carrying a stack of plates. He glanced around the room, his expression a mix of excitement and mild anxiety. "Eloise, could you give me a hand with these?" he asked, trying to break through the noise of the celebration. "Of course," she replied, forcing a smile as she moved to his side. Their eyes met briefly, and she could see the worry etched on his face. He was always caught in the middle, trying to appease his mother while also supporting her. "Have you talked to her yet?" Eloise asked, her voice low, as she helped him place the plates on the table. "Not yet. I just want everything to go smoothly today," David replied, glancing toward his mother, who was now greeting guests with her usual flair. Margaret was a force of nature. Her presence commanded the room, her sharp wit slicing through the cheerful chatter like a knife. Eloise watched as Margaret exchanged pleasantries with her friends, her laughter ringing out, yet there was a pointedness to her words that never failed to sting. "Isn't this lovely, Eloise?" Margaret called from across the room, her eyes narrowing slightly. I do hope you didn't burn anything this time." Eloise felt her face flush with embarrassment, a familiar humiliation. "No, Margaret, everything is perfect," she replied, her voice steady despite the twist of anxiety in her chest. She could feel the eyes of the guests on her, waiting for a reaction, and she forced herself to remain calm. As the celebration continued, Eloise retreated to the kitchen, needing a moment away from the spotlight. In the back of her mind, Clara's words echoed. "You need to stand up for yourself, Eloise. You deserve respect." But standing up for herself had never been easy, especially around Margaret. Eloise took a deep breath, wiping her hands on her apron. Just then, Clara arrived, her presence a welcome distraction. "There you are. I've been looking for you," she said, a bright smile on her face. "How's it going out there?" Eloise gave a half-hearted laugh. "Oh, just the usual. Margaret is in rare form. Today," Clara rolled her eyes, leaning against the counter. "You can't let her get to you. You've given her 30 years of your life. It's time to think about yourself." Eloise sighed, stirring the pot on the stove absent-mindedly. "I know, but it's hard. She's always had a way of making me feel small." "You're not small, Eloise. You're strong and capable. Just look at everything you've done for her," Clara insisted, her tone encouraging. "You need to show everyone, especially Margaret, that you're not just her caretaker. You have your own life and dreams." Eloise nodded, but doubt lingered in her mind. What if I stand up to her and it just makes things worse? "Sometimes, things have to get worse before they can get better," Clara replied firmly. "You owe it to yourself to try." As the party progressed, Eloise found herself mingling with the guests. She smiled and made small talk, but her heart wasn't in it. Her mind kept drifting back to Margaret's cutting remarks, each one replaying like a broken record. Then, just as she was beginning to feel comfortable, David approached her, his brow furrowed with worry. "Eloise, can we talk for a minute?" She nodded, grateful for the distraction, and they stepped into a quieter corner of the room. "What's wrong?" Eloise asked, concerned. "It's about Mom. I can feel the tension in the air. She seems different today, and I don't know how to handle it," David admitted, running a hand through his hair. "I just want this to be a good day for her." Eloise hesitated, considering her words carefully. "David, maybe we should talk about her behavior. You know she can be difficult." "I know, but it's her birthday. I don't want to ruin it by bringing up past issues," he replied, his voice strained. "But at the same time, I can't ignore how she treats you." Before Eloise could respond, the clinking of glasses and laughter echoed from the dining room, drawing their attention back to the festivities. David smiled weakly. "Let's just focus on making her happy today. We can deal with everything else later." Reluctantly, Eloise agreed. "Okay, for today." As the speeches began, Eloise felt a mix of anxiety and hope. David took the microphone, his voice steady but laced with emotion. "Thank you all for being here today to celebrate my mother's 90th birthday. It's a remarkable milestone, and I want to take a moment to recognize the incredible woman she is." Margaret beamed at the praise, but Eloise could see the flicker of discomfort in her eyes. David continued, "Mom, your strength and determination have shaped our family. I know it hasn't always been easy, but I want you to know how much you are loved." The room erupted in applause, but Margaret's smile faltered as David hesitated. Eloise could sense the shift in the atmosphere. The weight of unspoken words hung heavily in the air. "But I also think it's important for us to acknowledge that our relationships are complex," he added slowly, gauging his mother's reaction. Margaret's expression hardened, and she interrupted with a sharp retort. "David, this is not the time for your therapy sessions. It's my special day after all." Her voice dripped with sarcasm, causing an uncomfortable silence to fall over the room. Eloise's heart raced. She could feel the tension rising, and she knew she had to act. With a deep breath, she stepped forward, her voice steady. "Margaret, today is a celebration, but it's also a time for reflection. We've all endured a lot over the years. Maybe it's time we address some of that." Margaret's eyes narrowed. "And who do you think you are, Eloise? This is my party, and I don't need you to lecture me on my life choices." The guests shifted uncomfortably, the atmosphere thickening with awkwardness. Eloise felt a rush of anger and frustration. "I'm not lecturing you. I just think that maybe, just maybe, we could all benefit from a little honesty." Margaret scoffed, her lips curling into a disdainful smile. "Honesty? From you? Don't make me laugh." Eloise felt the color drain from her face, but she stood her ground. "I've spent 30 years caring for you, and I deserve to be treated with respect." The tension crackled between them, and Eloise could see David's face turn pale as he took a step back, unsure of how to intervene. Guests exchanged nervous glances, and the room fell silent, hanging on the precipice of confrontation. Margaret's expression shifted for a moment, vulnerability flickering in her eyes before she masked it with indifference. "You think you know me? You don't know anything about my life, Eloise." "Then let me help you understand," Eloise replied, her voice softer now. "We're all here to celebrate you, but that doesn't mean we can't face the truth. We all have our struggles, and it's okay to admit that." Margaret opened her mouth to retort, but Eloise pressed on, sensing the urgency of the moment. "You've pushed me away for so long, but I've always been here. Maybe it's time to let go of the past and allow ourselves to heal." The room remained silent, the weight of Eloise's words palpable. David looked from his mother to Eloise, his heart pounding. He could feel the tension in the air, the possibility of change hovering just out of reach. And in that moment, with the echoes of laughter fading into the background, Eloise realized that this confrontation might be the beginning of something different, an opportunity for understanding, healing, and perhaps even forgiveness. As party buzzed with laughter and chatter, the elegant living room of Margaret Albright's sprawling Charleston mansion filled with the clinking of glasses and the soft hum of a string quartet. Eloise Turner stood near the kitchen entrance, her floral apron contrasting sharply with the opulent decor around her. She watched as guests mingled, each one fawning over her mother-in-law, who sat on her throne-like armchair, a satisfied smirk plastered across her face. "Look at her," Margaret sneered softly, barely concealing her disdain as she gestured with a perfectly manicured hand toward Eloise. "She's practically invisible. It's like she's a ghost in her own home." Eloise's heart sank. She had spent the last 3 decades caring for this woman, and yet, on this special occasion, she felt more like a servant than a family member. David, Margaret's son, caught her eye from across the room, his brow furrowed with concern. He was caught in the middle, trying to please his mother while also supporting his wife. Eloise could see the tension in his shoulders as he maneuvered through the gathering, dodging the occasional eye roll from his mother. "Hey, you okay?" Clara, Eloise's closest friend, approached her with a warm smile. Clara had always been a beacon of support, and today was no different. "I don't know, Clara," Eloise sighed, glancing back at Margaret. "I feel so unappreciated. It's like no one sees what I do. Not even David." Clara crossed her arms, a frown creasing her brow. "You need to stand up for yourself, Eloise. You've given so much of your life to this family. You deserve to be recognized." Eloise shook her head. "It's easier said than done. Margaret has a way of belittling me, and I don't want to cause a scene today of all days." Clara opened her mouth to respond, but at that moment, a loud crash echoed from the hallway. The guests turned their attention toward the noise, and Eloise felt her heart race. She stepped out of the kitchen just as a young boy, one of Margaret's grandchildren, stumbled into the room, a box clutched tightly in his hands. "Look what I found!" he exclaimed, his eyes wide with excitement. The box was dusty and old, clearly from the attic, and it had been hastily pulled from its resting place. "What do you have there, sweetie?" one of the guests asked, leaning down to get a better look. The boy opened the box with a flourish, revealing a jumble of old photographs and memorabilia. "There are so many cool pictures in here," he shouted, his enthusiasm infectious. The guests gathered around, their curiosity piqued. Eloise felt a twinge of anxiety. She had often heard whispers about the contents of the attic secrets and stories from Margaret's past that were better left buried. But the boy's innocent excitement seemed to overshadow her concerns. "Let's see what you've got," David said, stepping closer to his son. His eyes lit up as he rifled through the box. "Wow, look at this one." He held up a faded photograph of a young Margaret, her hair cascading in soft curls, laughing with a group of friends. "Look at Grandma. She was so pretty," the boy giggled. Eloise forced a smile, but inside, she felt a knot of apprehension. Margaret had always been so proud of her glamorous image, and seeing her younger self might stir up emotions she wasn't sure she wanted to confront today. Then the boy pulled out something even more intriguing, a videotape nestled at the bottom of the box. "What's this?" he asked, holding it up like a treasure. "Looks like an old videotape," David said, taking it from his son. "I wonder what's on it." Margaret, who had been listening from her armchair, suddenly looked pale. "Put that down," she snapped, her voice sharp and commanding. "That's not for you to see." The room fell silent, the atmosphere thick with tension. Eloise felt her pulse quicken as she exchanged glances with Clara, who raised an eyebrow in concern. David hesitated, clearly caught between his mother's wrath and his curiosity. "But it's a part of our family history, Mom. Maybe it's something we should see." Margaret's eyes narrowed, her usual poise slipping for a moment. "I said no," she repeated firmly. Eloise stepped forward, suddenly feeling a surge of defiance. "David, maybe it would be good to watch it. It could give us a glimpse into her past. After all, it is her birthday." Margaret's glare shot toward Eloise, but Eloise stood her ground. She could feel Clara's encouraging presence at her side, and for the first time in a long while, she felt empowered. "We're all family here," Eloise added. "Don't you think we deserve to know more about her life?" David nodded, his expression softening as he looked at Eloise. "Mom, just one little peek? It's not going to hurt anyone." Margaret's expression wavered, flickering between anger and something softer, perhaps fear. With a resigned sigh, she crossed her arms and leaned back in her chair. "Fine, but don't say I didn't warn you." The room buzzed with anticipation as David retrieved a dusty old VCR from the side table and began to set it up. Eloise's heart raced as she watched the screen flicker to life. The guests gathered closer, their faces illuminated by the soft glow of the television. As the tape whirred to life, Eloise felt a mix of anxiety and curiosity. What secrets lay hidden in that old footage? What would it reveal about the woman who had been both a source of pain and a pillar of strength in her life? The anticipation in the room was palpable, and Eloise's breath caught in her throat. The camera focused on a younger Margaret, her laughter ringing through the speakers like music. She was vibrant, full of life, and the sight was almost unrecognizable compared to the stern matriarch everyone knew today. "Wow, look at her," Clara whispered, her eyes wide with surprise. Margaret shifted uncomfortably in her chair, her fingers tapping nervously against the armrest. Eloise watched her mother-in-law's face, searching for any sign of emotion. The video continued playing, showcasing a young Margaret making promises to a handsome man, her eyes sparkling with hope and ambition. "I'm going to travel the world, and I'll make a difference," the younger Margaret declared, her voice brimming with determination. "One day, I'll be someone who is remembered." The contrast was startling. Eloise felt a lump form in her throat as she realized how much Margaret had changed over the years. The laughter faded, and the hopes of youth had been replaced by the rigidity of control and disdain. "I remember that day," David said softly, his gaze fixed on the screen. She was so excited about that trip to Paris. Eloise glanced at Margaret, who was now staring at the ground, her expression unreadable. The room was silent, the guests riveted by the unfolding story. As the video played on, Eloise felt a shift within herself. Perhaps this glimpse into Margaret's past could bridge the gap that had long divided them. Maybe it was a key to understanding the woman who had been both a tyrant and a source of strength in her life. But for now, all they could do was watch, waiting for the next revelation to unfold. As guests gathered around the television, a palpable sense of anticipation filled the air. Eloise stood slightly apart, her heart racing as she wrestled with a tumult of emotions. She felt like a ghost in her own life, always lurking in the shadows of Margaret's grandeur. The anticipation of the video's debut hung over her like a cloak, heavy and constricting. Eloise's eyes flicked around the room, taking in the faces of the assembled guest friends, family, and acquaintances, all eager to celebrate Margaret's milestone. Yet, in her mind, she was drowning in a sea of anxiety. "Are you okay, Eloise?" Clara whispered, sidling up to her. Clara had been a steadfast friend, her presence a steadying force amid the chaos. "I'm fine," Eloise replied, her voice barely above a whisper, but the tremor in her tone betrayed her. "Just waiting. Don't let them see you sweat. You've done so much for her," Clara encouraged, her eyes sparkling with empathy. Eloise forced a smile, though it felt brittle and fragile. "I know, but it's never enough for Margaret. Even today, on her birthday, I feel like I'm still invisible." As the video began to play, the room fell silent, and all eyes turned toward the screen. Eloise's stomach churned with a mix of dread and curiosity. The flickering images illuminated the faces of her family and friends, reflecting both their excitement and uncertainty. The video started with grainy footage of a young Margaret, her hair cascading in loose curls, her face radiant with a youthful glow. She was dancing in a sunlit garden, laughter spilling from her lips as she twirled, her joy infectious. Eloise glanced at David, who stood beside her, his expression a mixture of awe and disbelief. "Wow, I've never seen her like that," David murmured, his voice barely audible over the nostalgic music playing in the background. "It's hard to imagine, isn't it?" Eloise replied, her heart aching as she watched the young woman on the screen. She was so full of life. As the video continued, it showcased Margaret making promises to a man whose face was blurred by time. The way she spoke sent shivers down Eloise's spine. There was a vulnerability and hopefulness in her voice that felt so distant from the woman she had known. "I swear I'll never forget you," Margaret said in the video, her tone earnest and sincere. "You're my everything, and I'll always carry you in my heart." The room was captivated, eyes glued to the screen, but Eloise felt a pang of sadness. It struck her that Margaret had built a fortress around her heart, and this moment, captured forever, was a glimpse into a world that had been lost. What happened to that woman? Eloise thought, her mind racing with questions. Where did all that light go? Suddenly, Margaret's voice broke through again, this time more somber. "Life isn't a fairy tale, and sometimes we lose sight of what's truly important." The words hung in the air, resonating with the guests. Eloise felt a slight shift in the atmosphere. She wasn't the only one who sensed the weight of Margaret's past. David leaned closer to Eloise, his expression serious. "Do you think she regrets it? Not pursuing her dreams?" "Maybe," Eloise replied, almost in a whisper. "Or maybe she's just too proud to admit it." The video continued, and Eloise watched as Margaret's youthful exuberance gave way to a more stoic demeanor. She could see the transition to once vibrant woman slowly morphing into the iron-willed matriarch they all knew. The laughter faded, replaced by tension-filled moments interspersed with hints of longing. As the video played on, the room was filled with an array of reactions. Some guests wiped away tears, while others exchanged glances of disbelief. Eloise's heart raced as she captured the moment. This was the first time many of them were witnessing the layers of Margaret's character. "Who knew she had this side?" whispered one of the guests to another, their voices barely masking their surprise. Eloise could hardly bear it. The woman on the screen was a stranger to her, yet she felt an overwhelming sense of empathy for the dreams that had been dashed. The video drew to a close, and silence enveloped the room. Eloise felt a knot of emotions twist in her stomach, a mix of sorrow for the past and gratitude that they had stumbled upon this hidden treasure. She turned to David, who was visibly shaken, his face a canvas of confusion and realization. "Did you know about any of this?" he asked, his voice low and earnest. Eloise shook her head, her eyes wide. "No, I had no idea. I always thought she was just, well, cold. I never considered she might have dreams, regrets." David was silent for a moment, processing the revelations. "It's hard to reconcile this woman with the one we know. She was so harsh. It makes you wonder what happened." Eloise nodded, feeling the weight of his words. "It's like there's this whole other life she's been hiding. We've only seen the surface." The gravity of the moment hung heavily, and Eloise felt an urge to reach out to Margaret, to connect with the woman behind the facade. But she hesitated, unsure of how to break through the barriers that had long defined their relationship. Just then, the silence was abruptly shattered as the guests began to murmur, sharing their thoughts on the video. Some expressed disbelief, while others voiced sympathy. Eloise felt a swell of emotion as she overheard snippets of conversations. "Maybe we've all misjudged her," one guest said. "She's just been trying to protect herself." Eloise caught David's eye, and they exchanged a knowing glance. Perhaps this was the catalyst they needed, the moment that could spark change. As the murmurs crescendoed, Eloise found herself yearning for a moment of clarity, a chance to confront the complexities of their family dynamics. She turned her gaze back to the television, now displaying a still image of young Margaret, a testament to lost dreams and unfulfilled promises. "Perhaps this is the beginning of something," Eloise whispered to David, her heart pounding with hope. "Maybe," he replied, his brow furrowed in thought. "But it's going to take time. We need to approach her carefully." Eloise nodded, feeling a sense of determination wash over her. She wanted to know Margaret beyond the dismissive remarks and cruel jibes, to understand the woman who had been both her oppressor and a source of unyielding strength. As the guests continued to discuss the video, Eloise took a deep breath, grounding herself in the moment. She knew that whatever lay ahead would require courage and vulnerability, but for the first time in years, she felt the flicker of something more profound than despair possibility. In that moment, Eloise resolved to confront the past and seek the truth buried beneath layers of resentment and misunderstandings. The video had unveiled a glimpse of Margaret's soul, and Eloise felt an unshakable urge to delve deeper into the stories that shaped their lives. As the festivities resumed, Eloise remained hopeful, her spirit ignited by the flickering images of a young woman who once dared to dream beyond the confines of her reality. The path ahead was uncertain, but she was ready to face it, armed with the knowledge that even the most formidable walls could be breached with understanding and compassion. Eloise stood for a moment in the living room, her heart racing as she watched Margaret retreat towards her bedroom. The sound of laughter and chatter from the party outside felt distant and muffled, like the world had faded away, leaving only the two of them in a bubble of unspoken tension. Taking a deep breath, she made her way down the long corridor, the plush carpet absorbing her footsteps, and knocked lightly on the door. "Margaret," she called softly, her voice barely above a whisper. "Can I come in?" There was a brief pause before Margaret's voice, shaky and strained, responded. I'd rather be alone, Eloise. But the urgency in Eloise's heart wouldn't let her turn away. Please, I just want to talk. I'm worried about you. After another moment of silence, the door creaked open, revealing Margaret sitting on the edge of her elegantly adorned bed. Her eyes were red-rimmed and glistening with unshed tears, and her manicured hands trembled as they clutched a small, worn Objective-framed photograph of a younger Margaret. Full of life and vibrancy, her arms wrapped around a handsome man with dark hair and a charming smile. "Why are you bothering me?" Margaret snapped, but her tone lacked the usual venom. Instead, it was tinged with vulnerability, a crack in her rigid facade. "Can't you just let me be?" Eloise took a tentative step inside, closing the door behind her. "I can't just leave you like this, Margaret. I know today has been overwhelming. I saw you watching the video." Margaret's expression hardened, but the tears that threatened to spill over betrayed her. "What do you know about me? You've only ever seen me as a tyrant, a monster. You've never cared to understand." "I've cared," Eloise replied, her voice steady despite the storm brewing inside. "For 30 years I've cared. I've dedicated my life to you, and all I've received in return is scorn." Margaret looked away, her gaze falling on the photograph again. "You don't understand what it's like to have dreams crushed, to be trapped by your own choices." "Then let me help you understand," Eloise urged, her heart aching for the woman she had spent decades caring for. "You've hidden behind this mask of arrogance and disdain, but I know there's more to you than that. You have regrets, just like all of us. Let's talk about them." Margaret's voice trembled as she replied, "You think I want to open up? You think I want to expose my weaknesses to you?" "No," Eloise said softly, stepping closer. "But I think you need to. You've been carrying this weight for so long, and I can see it's breaking you. You're not just a matriarch. You're a mother, a woman who once had hopes and dreams. Just like me." Margaret's eyes flashed with a mix of anger and surprise. "You think you can equate your life to mine? You've had it easy compared to the sacrifices I've made." Eloise felt her own frustration bubbling to the surface, but she held it back. "I'm not saying it's the same. I'm saying we're both human. We've both made choices that haunt us. But holding on to that anger isn't helping either of us." "Why do you care?" Margaret asked, her voice now a whisper, as if the fight had left her. "You have your life, your family. Why do you even bother with me?" "Because you're family, whether you like it or not," Eloise replied, her heart racing as she took another step closer. "And I want to help you find peace. I want to help you understand that it's never too late to confront the past." The tension in the room shifted, the air growing thick with unspoken words. Eloise could see the cracks in Margaret's armor, the way her shoulders drooped slightly, the way her eyes softened just a fraction. "You don't know what you're asking," Margaret said, her voice trembling. "I'm afraid of what I might reveal." "Then let's face that fear together," Eloise urged, her voice steady and calm. "You don't have to do this alone." Margaret's gaze fell to the photograph again, and Eloise could see the memories swirling in her mind, the pain and regret etched into her features. "He was my first love," Margaret finally said, her voice barely above a whisper, "and I let him slip away." "Who?" Eloise asked gently, sensing the importance of this moment. "James," Margaret confessed, her voice cracking. "He was everything I wanted, but I was too proud to admit it. I thought I could have it all: money, power, success, but I lost him in the process." Eloise felt her heart ache for Margaret. "And then you married someone else? Was that your way of trying to forget?" Margaret nodded slowly, her gaze still fixed on the photograph. "I thought marrying Richard would fill the void, but it only made things worse. I was never happy, and now I'm just a shell of the woman I used to be." Eloise took a deep breath, her chest tightening with empathy. "You've been so focused on maintaining this image of strength that you've lost sight of who you really are. It's okay to be vulnerable, Margaret. It's okay to admit your mistakes. I just wanted to be respected, Margaret said, her voice barely a whisper. I thought that if I showed no weakness, people would admire me. But all I've done is push everyone away. Eloise stepped closer, kneeling down so that she was at Margaret's eye level. You can still change that. You can still reach out to the people who love you. We can work through this together. Margaret finally met Eloise's gaze, and for the first time, Eloise saw a flicker of hope in her eyes, a glimmer of the woman she had once known. Do you think it's really possible to change? She asked, her voice filled with uncertainty. Yes, Eloise replied, her heart swelling with determination. But it starts with you. You have to be willing to confront your past and let go of the anger that's been holding you back for so long. Tears spilled down Margaret's cheeks as she clutched the photograph tighter. I don't even know where to begin. Start here, Eloise said softly, reaching out to take Margaret's hand in hers. Tell me about him. Tell me about James. As Margaret began to speak, her voice trembling but growing stronger with each word, Eloise listened intently. She could feel the weight of the years of silence lifting, the burden of unspoken regrets slowly being shared. It was a beginning, a fragile thread of connection woven through their shared pain, and for the first time in many years, Eloise felt a flicker of hope for the future. Eloise felt a surge of adrenaline as she stepped closer to the door of Margaret's room. The atmosphere in the house had shifted dramatically with the revelation in the video, and now she could feel the weight of unspoken words pressing down on her. Taking a deep breath, she gently pushed the door open, her heart racing. The sight before her was unexpected. Margaret, the formidable matriarch, sat on the edge of her bed, tears streaming down her face. Eloise, Margaret whispered, her voice cracking. I didn't expect to feel this way. The room was dimly lit, the shadows casting an almost ethereal glow around the older woman, who looked so different now, vulnerable, exposed. Eloise hesitated for a moment, unsure of how to approach this unexpected moment of fragility. Margaret, Eloise began softly, stepping further into the room. I saw the video. You looked happy, and it made me realize that there's so much more to you than the woman I've known all these years. She paused, searching for the right words. You've always been so strong, but it seems like there's a part of you that has been locked away. Margaret wiped her tears with the back of her hand, her expression shifting from sorrow to something more contemplative. Do you really want to know? She asked, her voice a mixture of challenge and vulnerability. You think you can understand me after all this time? Eloise felt a surge of determination. I want to try. I've dedicated my life to taking care of you, and I deserve to understand who you really are, not just a woman who belittles me. The two women locked eyes, and in that moment, something shifted. Margaret sighed deeply, the weight of years pressing down on her shoulders. I've always been afraid, she finally admitted. Afraid of being judged, of showing weakness. You see, I wasn't always this cold-hearted woman. I had dreams, Eloise. I wanted to be a painter, to travel the world, to love freely. But life had other plans. Eloise felt a pang of empathy. What happened to those dreams? She asked gently. Margaret hesitated, a flicker of regret crossing her face. I fell in love with a man who didn't love me back. He was everything I ever wanted, and it hurt to know that he would never choose me. Instead, I married a man who could provide for me, who offered stability, but I never loved him the way I loved him. David's father, Eloise said quietly, her heart racing as the pieces started to fit together. You were never able to let go of that love. Margaret nodded, a new wave of tears spilling down her cheeks. It was easier to build this wall around me and become the person everyone expected. I thought I could control everything, but instead, I just pushed everyone away, including my own son. In that moment, David, who had been listening quietly from the doorway, felt an overwhelming urge to intervene. He had heard enough of the conversation through the slightly ajar door. Taking a deep breath, he stepped inside, his presence commanding yet cautious. "Mom, is this true?" he asked, his voice steady but laced with concern. Margaret looked up, her expression shifting from despair to surprise. "David, she stammered, her vulnerability momentarily replaced by the instinct to shield herself. He took a few steps forward, his eyes searching her face for answers. "You never talked about Dad like this. Why now? Why didn't you ever tell me how you felt? I always thought you were happy with the choices you made." Margaret's eyes darted between her son and Eloise, the truth hanging heavily in the air. "Because I didn't want you to see me as weak. I thought I was protecting you from my mistakes." David shook his head, frustration bubbling to the surface. "But you weren't protecting me. You were pushing me away. You built walls around yourself that kept me from knowing you. And it hurt, Mom. It hurt for a long time." Eloise watched the exchange, her heart breaking for both of them. She could see the pain etched into David's features, the years of resentment and confusion spilling over. She stepped closer to him, wanting to provide support. "David, maybe this is the moment we can finally break through," she said softly. Margaret's expression transformed, fear mixing with remorse. "What do you want from me?" she asked, her voice trembling. "I can't change the past. I can't undo the choices I made. You can start by being honest," David replied firmly, his voice unwavering. "Admit that you've made mistakes and that you're willing to try to fix this. We've both been hurt by your choices, but we need you to acknowledge it before we can move forward." Margaret looked down at her hands, trembling slightly. I don't know if I can," she admitted, her voice barely above a whisper. "I've spent so long being this person, I don't know how to be anything else." Eloise took a step forward, her heart pounding in her chest. "You can start by being vulnerable with us, Margaret. We're here for you. I've spent 30 years caring for you, and I want to understand you not just as the woman who employed me, but as a part of this family." David nodded in agreement, his expression softening. "We want to understand, Mom, but we need you to meet us halfway. This is not just about you, it's about us. The three of us have been caught in this cycle of pain for too long." Tears streamed down Margaret's face as she looked from Eloise to David, the weight of realization crashing down on her. "I've been so afraid of losing you both that I pushed you away instead. I didn't want to be seen as weak, but in my attempts to be strong, I lost you." David stepped closer, his heart aching for the mother he had longed to connect with. "It's not too late, Mom. We can work through this together if you're willing to try. We can heal, but you have to let us in." Margaret's breath hitched as she began to understand the depth of her mistakes. "I want to try. I really do. But I don't know where to start. You've already taken the first step by being honest," Eloise said gently, placing a reassuring hand on Margaret's shoulder. "This is just the beginning. We can find a way to rebuild what has been broken." The three of them stood in the dim light of the room, the air thick with unspoken emotions. David reached out, taking his mother's hand in his, squeezing it tightly. "We're a family," he said, his voice steady. "No matter how complicated things have been, we can find a way to make it work." Margaret looked into David's eyes, and for the first time in years, she felt a glimmer of hope. "I want that," she said, her voice filled with determination. "I want to be a better mother. I want to try to be a better person. For both of you." Eloise smiled, her heart swelling with a sense of renewed purpose. "Then let's do this together. We can face the past, but we'll also build a future filled with understanding and love." As they stood there, hand in hand, something shifted in the room. The weight of the years began to lift, replaced by a fragile yet powerful thread of connection. Together, they would navigate the complexities of their shared history, forging a new path towards healing and reconciliation. As lights dimmed in the living room, the hum of conversations faded into an eager silence as everyone gathered around the television. Eloise's heart raced with an unsettling mix of anxiety and curiosity. She had always felt like a shadow in Margaret's world, But today, the old video might just illuminate secrets that lay in the depths of the matriarch's past. As the tape whirred to life, the flickering images revealed a younger Margaret, vibrant and full of life. Eloise leaned forward, captivated. The woman on screen laughed with abandon, her hair cascading in waves, her eyes sparkling with dreams yet unrealized. Scenes of a garden party unfolded, where a handsome young man stood close by, making promises that time would ultimately break. Eloise glanced at David, who sat beside her. His expression shifted from curiosity to shock as he watched this unfamiliar version of his mother. The room was filled with a mix of emotions. Some guests wiped away tears, while others stared in disbelief. Eloise could sense the weight of the moment, the air thick with unspoken words and buried feelings. As the video continued, Margaret's laughter rang through the room, but Eloise noticed how the smiles faded into silence as the footage shifted. There, captured in sepia tones, was a scene of young Margaret gazing wistfully at the camera, her eyes filled with longing. It was a moment that spoke volumes, full of unfulfilled dreams and a love that had never materialized. Who was he? Eloise found herself whispering, barely able to contain her curiosity. David's brow furrowed, and he leaned closer to the screen, as if seeking answers from the past. "I don't know," he replied quietly, his voice barely above a whisper. "I've never seen him before." The video concluded, and an awkward silence enveloped the room. Margaret, who had been the center of attention, suddenly felt the weight of the years pressing down on her. The guests exchanged glances, unsure of what to say next. Eloise felt the tension crackling in the air, a storm brewing beneath the surface. Margaret stood. "That's why I've been so hard on you both." David's expression morphed from confusion to shock, and Eloise watched as he processed his mother's revelation. "So, all these years, you've been living with this secret?" he asked quietly, his voice thick with emotion. Margaret looked at her son, her heart laid bare. "I was afraid of how it would change everything. I didn't want you to think less of me. I thought I was protecting you from my mistakes." Eloise observed the dynamic change between them, David's anger and disappointment slowly giving way to understanding. "Mom, this isn't just about you anymore. It's about us too," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "We need to talk about this, about everything." Margaret nodded, tears streaming down her face. "I'm sorry. I've hurt you both in ways I can't take back. I thought I was doing what was best, but I see now how wrong I was." The room was thick with emotions, pain, regret, and the faintest glimmer of hope. Eloise felt a sense of relief wash over her. For the first time, Margaret was showing her true self, stripped of the armor she had worn for so long. "Maybe it's not too late," David said, his voice steady. "Maybe we can start to heal together." Eloise nodded, feeling a warmth in her chest. We can create a new path forward, one built on honesty and understanding." As they sat together, the weight of the past still lingered, but for the first time, the air felt lighter. They were not just a family bound by blood, but by the shared experience of pain and the desire for healing. In that moment, Eloise realized that the bonds they formed could withstand even the deepest wounds, and together, they could navigate the complexities of love, forgiveness, and the journey ahead. The air in the room was thick with unspoken words and unresolved emotions. David stood at the threshold of his mother's bedroom, his heart pounding in his chest. He had overheard the muffled voices of Eloise and Margaret, and the intensity of their conversation had stirred something deep within him. The weight of years spent in silence and resentment bore down on him, urging him to step forward and confront the truths that had long been buried. Taking a deep breath, David pushed the door ajar and entered. "Mom," he said, his voice steady but tinged with concern. "Can we talk?" Margaret looked up, her eyes red from crying, the remnants of her youthful glamour overshadowed by the lines of age and regret etched on her face. Eloise was still beside her, her demeanor calm yet firm, an anchor in the storm of emotions swirling around them. The room was dimly lit, memories scattered across the walls in the form of photographs and mementos from a life well lived, but marred by sorrow. "What do you want, David?" Margaret snapped, a defensive edge creeping into her voice. "Can't a woman have a moment of peace?" David frowned, determination setting his jaw. "You've had more than a moment, Mom. We need to talk about everything. About what I just heard. About you and Eloise." He gestured toward Eloise, who remained poised, her eyes flickering with a mix of sympathy and caution. Margaret's expression hardened, but there was a flicker of vulnerability beneath her steely facade. "There's nothing to discuss. I'm not interested in rehashing the past," she replied, crossing her arms over her chest as if to shield herself from the emotions that threatened to spill over. Eloise, sensing the tension escalating, took a step forward. "Margaret, please. This isn't just about the past. It's about the present and the future. David deserves to know what you've been holding back." David's heart raced as he listened. "Mom, please. I've spent my life trying to understand you, trying to make sense of our family. But it's hard when you refuse to open up. What good does it do to keep everything bottled up?" Margaret's expression softened momentarily, the walls she had built around her heart beginning to crack. "You think we could really benefit from talking to someone, a therapist, maybe, to help us navigate these feelings and create a healthier family dynamic?" Margaret nodded, a small smile breaking through the tears. "I'd like that. I'm ready to face the past. I want to understand my mistakes and learn how to move forward." Eloise stepped beside David, her heart swelling with hope. "We'll do this together. You're not alone, Margaret. We're a family, and we'll face whatever comes our way as a team." In that moment, the seeds of healing were sown. The journey ahead would not be easy, but they were ready to confront their past and build a future grounded in love, understanding, and mutual respect. As David and Eloise exchanged a glance, they knew they had taken the first step towards mending the fractures that had long plagued their family. Together, they would navigate the complexities of their relationships, forging a new legacy of connection and compassion. As conversation continued to unfold in Margaret's dimly lit room, a sudden rustle interrupted the emotional atmosphere they had created. Eloise, David, and Margaret were still reeling from the revelations of the past, emotions swirling around them like a tempest. Suddenly, an old envelope slipped from the edge of a box that had been precariously perched atop a stack of dusty items. It fluttered to the floor, drawing the attention of all three. "What's that?" David asked, his brow furrowing as he bent down to retrieve the envelope. It was yellowed with age and bore Margaret's name scrawled in her elegant handwriting. A sense of foreboding mixed with curiosity gripped the room. Eloise's heart raced, a mixture of hope and anxiety swelling within her. "Maybe it's something important," she suggested, her voice barely above a whisper. Margaret, who had been staring vacantly at the wall, suddenly became alert. "Put that down, David. It's just old junk," she snapped, her tone tinged with defensiveness. David, undeterred by his mother's reaction, held the envelope up to the light, inspecting it. "It looks like it's from a long time ago, Mom. Are you sure you don't want to see what it says?" Margaret's expression hardened, but there was a flicker of something deeper, perhaps regret or curiosity. "I told you to leave it alone," she replied sharply, but the tremor in her voice hinted at her internal struggle. With a deep breath, David carefully opened the envelope. Inside, there was a folded piece of paper, worn and fragile. He pulled it out, his fingers trembling slightly as he began to unfold it. "It's a will," he announced, looking between Eloise and Margaret. "It's dated. Oh, it's dated over 20 years ago." Margaret's eyes widened momentarily, her composure faltering for the first time that evening. "David, I really don't think let me read it," he interrupted, his voice firm but gentle. He cleared his throat and began to read aloud, his eyes scanning the familiar, looping script. "To whom it may concern," he began, his voice steady. "This document serves as my last will and testament. It is my wish to leave my estate, including my properties and possessions, to my beloved daughter-in-law, Eloise Turner. The words hung in the air, heavy with implication. Eloise's breath caught in her throat, her heart pounding. "Me?" she whispered incredulously. David's face mirrored Eloise's shock. "Mom, is this real?" he asked, turning to Margaret, who had gone pale. "You left everything to Eloise?" Margaret looked between her son and daughter-in-law, her expression a mixture of vulnerability and defiance. It was a different time," she said softly, her voice shaking. "I didn't know how to express my feelings back then." Eloise felt a rush of emotions, confusion, surprise, and a surge of validation. "Why didn't you ever tell me?" she asked, her voice trembling with a mix of hurt and curiosity. "Did you really think so little of me all these years?" Margaret's gaze fell to the floor, her defenses crumbling. "No, that's not it," she murmured. I was afraid of what you might think of me, afraid of being vulnerable. I thought if I kept my distance, it would protect us both." David stepped closer to his mother, his expression softening. "Mom, we've been through so much. Why didn't you let us in? Why didn't you ever acknowledge how much Eloise has done for you?" Margaret's lips trembled, and she finally met Eloise's gaze. "I was so consumed by my own fears and regrets that I pushed you away. I didn't know how to appreciate you while I had the chance." Eloise's heart ached for the woman she had spent decades caring for, the woman who had often made her feel insignificant. "I never wanted anything from you except respect and kindness," she admitted, tears brimming in her eyes. "I dedicated my life to you, and it hurt so deeply to feel like I was never enough." Margaret's voice broke as she spoke, the walls she had built around her heart crumbling. "You were always enough, Eloise. I see that now. I was just too proud to admit it, too stubborn to let anyone in." David, feeling the weight of the moment, took a step back to give his mother and wife space. "We can work through this," he said softly, his voice filled with hope. "This is a chance for us to heal, to understand each other better." Margaret reached out, her hand trembling as she grasped Eloise's. "I'm so sorry for how I treated you, for the hurt I caused. I thought I had to be strong and in control, but now I see that my strength was really my weakness. I didn't allow myself to love you the way you deserved." Eloise, feeling the warmth of Margaret's hand in hers, allowed herself to believe in the possibility of healing. "It's never too late to change," she replied, her voice steadying as she spoke. "We can move forward together, but it's going to take time and honesty." Margaret nodded, tears streaming down her cheeks. "I want that. I want to be better. I want to honor the love I have for you, Eloise. I want you to know how much you mean to me." As they stood together in the intimate space of the room, the air shifted. There was a newfound understanding, a tentative bond forming between them. David observed the exchange, feeling a sense of relief wash over him. "I think we should all consider family therapy," he suggested carefully. "It might help us navigate through this together as a family." Eloise smiled through her tears, feeling a sense of hope that had long eluded her. "I think that's a wonderful idea. We can work through our past while building a brighter future." Margaret took a deep breath, her heart swelling with a mixture of regret and hope. "I want that too. I want to be part of this family in a way that I never was before. I want to make amends, starting today." As they stood in the quiet room, enveloped in a sense of possibility, the old envelope lay forgotten on the floor, a symbol of the past they were ready to leave behind. The path ahead was uncertain, but for the first time, they felt ready to walk it together into a future filled with love, forgiveness, and the promise of healing.